G'day everyone. Well, welcome to this afternoon session. I understand from Politico that this is the most important conversation that's going to happen today, except for the Biden-Trump presidential debate. So well done on choosing this conversation. It's very good. Welcome back. This session will unpack action for climate empowerment and the role of public engagement at COPs, moderated by Denise Cauchi. I'm really looking forward to this as someone who's been to a COP. Yeah, I love it. Denise is a strategist and advocate for climate action and human rights, currently serving as Australian Program Lead at Climate Outreach. Previously, she was Executive Director of Doctors for the Environment Australia and co-founder of Diaspora Action Australia. Denise was awarded a Medal of Order of Australia for her contributions to human rights and multiculturalism. Well done, Denise. Congratulations. Are you wearing it today? No. Should wear it everywhere you go. Do you get free McDonald's? No? Cops do. I don't know why. If you get a free OAM, you should get free meals at McDonald's. All right. Take it away, Denise.
Thanks, Dan. Good afternoon. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I realise we're in competition with a very awesome-looking session over in the other room. So thanks for coming. My name, as Dan said, is Denise Cauchi, and Climate Outreach is a team of social scientists and communication specialists who are working to widen and deepen public engagement with climate change. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people who've cared for this country for millennia and from whom we have an awful lot to learn. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to Uncle Ray and any other First Nations people in the room today. So this afternoon, we're here to talk about how public engagement can unlock progress on climate and to tell the stories of the work being done across civil society and government. In particular, we're exploring Action for Climate Empowerment, or ACE, which describes work under Article 12 of the Paris Agreement. Its purpose is to empower everyone in society to take action through 6 key elements, and these are education and public awareness, training, public participation, public access to information, and international cooperation. So while ACE is not a household word yet, and not a very familiar term in the climate space, we're actually very familiar with the work that it covers because many of us are doing this every day. So today we've got a fantastic lineup of panellists and that I would like to introduce you to. We have Pastor Ray Minniecon, who is an executive member of the Indigenous Peoples Organisation, Director of Bungie Consultancies, and is a descendant of the Kabi Kabi Nation and Gurang Gurang Nation of southeast Queensland. Uncle Ray is also a descendant of the South Sea Islander people with deep and abiding connections to the people of Ambren Land. And Uncle Ray is involved with so many organisations, is on boards and committees that I cannot even name them all. Next to Uncle Ray is Dr. Jenny Newell, who is the Curator for Climate Change at the Climate Solutions Centre Australia Museum in Sydney. She has a background in environmental history and working in museums in the UK, USA and Australia. She opens up platforms for diverse voices and creates exhibitions and conversations that encourage positive action for a safer future. Then we have Amelia Turk, who is part of the local conference of youth in the Organising team Australia, which has been running consultations with children and youth around Australia and has synthesised the inputs into the National Child and Youth Statement on Climate Change, which is this one, which they launched on Monday here. Then we have Dr. Krista Singleton-Cambage, who is WWF's global lead on COP31. She was previously WWF Australia's head of climate and food security and has had senior roles with the Nature Conservancy in Australia and the United States. She's worked in Canberra with DFAT and the Environment Department and has a PhD in international environmental law. And finally, we have Jared Huntley, who works at the Commonwealth Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. He's Australia's national ACE focal point and negotiates on ACE, gender equality, social inclusion, youth empowerment within UNFCCC. So before we go to our panel, we have a recorded presentation from Noora Firaq, who is Climate Outreach's Deputy CEO. And Noora, as well as being our Deputy CEO, leads our work at UNFCCC and COP and has worked extensively on ACE dialogue and negotiations. Noora grew up on the front lines of climate change in the Maldives, so one of the most climate vulnerable countries of the world. So she has seen the climate impacts firsthand. So with that, if we could bring on Noora's presentation, please.
Hello, my name is Noora Firaq. I grew up in the Maldives, one of the climate vulnerable countries. Maldives is still very much my home and where most of my loved ones live. So climate change is very personal and emotional for me. Today, I live in the UK and I'm Deputy CEO of Climate Outreach. I'm speaking to you from the UK and I'm very sorry that I'm not there with you in person. My colleague Denise Cauchi and our Australia lead is there with you today. I often feel disconnected with the typical climate narratives that are out there. I often feel like we don't hear enough of the climate stories and the emotions that I know will contribute to accelerating climate action. We know stories matter through our research and through lived experience. Climate story is a powerful tool to unlock progress on climate action. So how can we get these stories out there? How can we get these stories and emotions to be part of the decision-making process? How can we involve people in climate action? UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement itself recognizes the power of involving people. Action for Climate Empowerment, or ACE, is a term used by the UNFCCC under Article 6 of the Convention and Article 12 of the Paris Agreement. The goal of ACE is to empower everyone in society to take part in climate action through 6 key elements. Those 6 key elements are education, public awareness, training, public participation, access to information, and international cooperation. Why? Because addressing climate change is like no other task. People are key to how we succeed. We are the solution, not the problem. Because we can't just keep making promises and tell people to act. We need to follow through on those promises with action, and that means supporting people to take real action and making changes happen. Countries making real progress on climate put people at the heart of what they are doing. In Scotland, in Costa Rica, and in Ghana, we've seen effective policies shaped by citizen engagement and participation. So we know our stories make a difference and our emotions make a difference. ACE provides a toolbox for just doing that. At Climate Outreach, we have been actively working to advance the implementation of ACE through the COP processes alongside the international community. The Glasgow Work Programme, which was implemented at COP26, provides a 10-year framework at enhancing the implementation of ACE across all levels, internationally, nationally, and locally. Glasgow Work Programme also offers guiding principles and sets 4 thematic priority areas relevant to addressing the gaps and challenges that currently exist in ACE implementation. Those 4 thematic priority areas are policy coherence, coordinated action, tools and support, and the last one is monitoring, evaluation, and reporting. Glasgow Work Programme also encourages countries to assess their specific needs for ACE implementation in their countries, and also to use things like social science research to understand audience and identify potential partners, encourages governments to integrate ACE elements in their climate policies and develop a national strategy involving 6 elements of ACE. It asks governments to enhance cooperation and to bring together various expertise and resources to accelerate ACE implementation. Glasgow Work Programme also asks countries to determine the most efficient and cost-effective ways to implement ACE in their own countries. Work programmes also introduce the concept of appointing ACE national focal points. They are personals appointed by the government. ACE national focal points act as bridges between governments, UNFCCC, civil society, and international community. Their responsibilities include integrating ACE into national strategies, facilitating coordination between various stakeholders, and helping to monitor and report on ACE activities. Over time, the role of ACE focal national points have expanded to include driving greater public participation and fostering a stronger, clearer framework for ACE implementation and reporting. Civil society organisations like ours have a critical role to play here. At Climate Outreach, in our national work, we focus heavily using social science research and understand specific audiences. ACE is an important opportunity for us. ACE is an opportunity to get our stories and emotions to matter in the decision-making process. We believe ACE is a key to addressing all climate issues, including mitigation, adaptation, resilience, and others. ACE offers essential elements for engaging with the public and a toolbox for getting climate stories into decision-making, our stories, our emotions, and our say into the decision-making process. A trust-building mechanism in collective climate action. ACE is a tool to unlock progress on climate action. Supporting and implementing ACE can take many forms. We directly work with parties, their national ACE focal points, and the UNFCCC to provide support for ACE dialogue and negotiations within the process. We also work at national levels to progress public engagement and participation in climate conversations. ACE Observatory and MEIS are two organisations that's heavily focused on monitoring, evaluation, and reporting, including the development of reporting indicators. The power of ACE is that it puts people at the heart of climate story. Many organisations are doing a lot of work that falls under elements of ACE, and I'm sure many of you are there today as well. But we often don't hear about them, so we're not reporting on them. And there are elements of ACE that haven't yet received sufficient attention in certain regions. Consequently, we are not stitching the 6 elements of ACE together to amplify their power and impact. Progress on ACE varies significantly from country to country. There are very real practical challenges to ACE implementation. For instance, some need additional funding to be able to implement ACE. For some countries, there are barriers for implementing a national strategy. Some countries don't yet have an ACE national focal point. UK, Italy, Germany have made significant strides in incorporating elements of ACE into climate policies and strategies. Countries like UAE and Japan have integrated ACE using slightly different models to countries in Europe. It isn't always one size fits all. Therefore, I think we do need to discuss the importance of Article 12 ACE and how we implement ACE in countries like UK and Australia, and how we as civil society contribute to this effort. I think the discussion that will follow after me speaking is crucial. Creating a climate-smart world requires accelerated action across all levels of society. These changes will require clear mandate from all citizens worldwide, empowering governments to act. Creating this broad public mandate requires effective communication, public engagement, and participation. Without broad-based public support, the policies we develop may fail. Implementation of ACE can create that much-needed mandate. So, It is important that we continue to grow ACE community to include civil society and other expertise. I am hopeful because we are having these conversations today and the ACE community is growing. Thank you for hearing me, and I look forward to working with many of you on the implementation of ACE and the climate story. Hope you all have a lovely time at Better Futures Forum. Thank you.
Thanks, Noora, if you're watching this on the live stream. So one of the elements of ACE is education. And Uncle Ray, I know that you have been working a lot in education, and you've also seen firsthand the impacts of climate on country communities, how that affects land, water, availability of food. I wonder if you could tell us a bit about the work you're doing to educate.
Well, thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Better Futures Australia. They were one of the first organisations here to allow the Indigenous peoples a platform since before COVID. So I want to thank BFF for inviting us here again today to have our say, and thank you, ACE, for this particular panel discussion with these very honourable people here who share this platform with us. I'm very honoured to be here with you all. For me and for our Indigenous peoples, climate crisis is not an issue that we've been able to be involved in for quite some time, but we've been involved in it for 236 years, since 1788. Before that, we knew what we had to do to look after our country, and we kept it in pristine condition. And in our Indigenous ways, before an Aboriginal child reaches the age of, say, 10, 12 or 14, they've already got a PhD in environmental science. They've got a PhD in marine biology. They've got a PhD in how to look after land and water and fish and all the other kinds of things. They even have a PhD in astronomy, because that's the Aboriginal education system. That's how it worked. So we trained our people to look after country, and that's the first priority, is look after your land. And so since 1788, there's been two major issues, I think, that we try to educate people on. Firstly is land rights. Not just that we as a political people have land or want to have our land back again and recognised as our land, but also on the other side, we know that the land also has rights. And those rights have been abused since 1788, and we'll continue to tell you that. Those land rights are there for your future and for your benefit. If I were to compare Australia to those who have come here in 1788, what I find about Little England is that they have land rights, and under their laws, you can't just go into any little forest over there and start digging a hole, because it's all protected. But they can come over here and just wipe out all of our forests, dig up all of our lands, and do whatever they want, because there is no protections. And so land rights has been here since 1788, as well as the rights of our land has been here since 1788. The second part of it is not just about land rights, but it's about human rights. So the climate crisis has those two very important issues at the heart of it: land rights and human rights. And if we can recognise that, we might be able to work out how we can work together to ensure that the land has its rights recognised and legalised, and act appropriately towards it. And the second is our human rights, how we observe and look after the land for future generations. As an Indigenous elder, I still carry the knowledge passed down from our ancestors who lived in harmony with the land for millennia. And the impacts of climate change on our country and communities are just not abstract thoughts. They are deeply personal, and they have been, over these many years, very devastating. Our lands, waters and skies are the very foundation of our cultural identity, our spirituality and our survival. We understand that when the land suffers, we suffer also, not just as Indigenous peoples, but you could look at yourselves too and see the suffering there too. It is critical that all Australians recognise this truth. The crisis we face with climate change is not just a scientific or political issue, it is a deeply moral one based in human rights and land rights. Our sacred connection to the earth teaches us that country is a living entity that holds stories, wisdom, and life. It provides for us. That's what we call the land, our mother. When our ecosystems collapse, they take with them not only biodiversity and also the cultural knowledge that Indigenous peoples have carefully nurtured over generations. And so education and awareness must be front and centre in tackling this crisis. And all Australians, regardless of age or background, need to understand that climate change is an urgent threat that disproportionately affects my people. Sea level rises, threaten sacred sites, extreme weather events displace communities, and changing ecosystems disrupts traditional ways of life. We must ensure that education systems in schools and universities, community groups, embrace Indigenous knowledge systems which have long held sustainable practices for managing and caring for the land. By trying to elevate Indigenous voices in conversations around climate action, we can ensure that this crisis is addressed with the respect and understanding it demands. Our young people in particular must be both empowered to lead, drawing on both ancient wisdom and modern science to create a future that honours the earth. The impacts of climate change on our country are already upon us, but with education, awareness and collective action, we think there may be hope. Hope that we can protect the land in our communities, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. Hope that by listening and learning and acting now, we may have a better future together. This is not just about preserving the environment. It is about preserving our cultural survival and the legacy we leave for future generations. So those two things I ask you to take away. Land rights, knowing that the land has rights. It has a voice. It has a spirit. Our mother is always there to support us and sustain us. And the second right is our human right. That's your human right to make sure that you can live in your country in freedom and also in the knowledge that your land, our mother, will sustain you into the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Uncle Ray. Land rights and human rights. I think that's a perspective that, if we're talking about how we embed Indigenous knowledge systems and perspectives into policy, then this is a pretty clear direction on how we might start. Thanks. I will pass now to Jenny. Jenny has been at the Australian Museum, has been curating information and exhibitions, and has been doing a whole lot of work around education and public awareness on climate. And you've also been consciously using an ACE framework in your work to do this. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And it's great to be here on the Newell and Ngambri land where I grew up. So it's really great to be back and honoured to be here in this exalted company. Thanks. I was really delighted when I was reading an article by my colleague Henry McGee in the UK. He runs Curating Tomorrow, and he was referencing Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, I hadn't actually recognised before that there was such a thing as action for climate empowerment, and it was just so exciting because it's suddenly this really wonderful framework for us to see incredible value and a potential to speak at that intergovernmental level for cultural institutions, because this is exactly the work that we're all doing if we're working on trying to help people to recognise what's going on with the climate crisis and trying to increase public participation in just taking action. We need something which is going to provide a motivation for action that's not just a curator wanting to do it. We need our higher-ups to see this as a valuable thing to do. And something like the ACE framework provides a justification for us to really put time and effort and resources into this kind of action in our cultural institutions that our higher-ups can see as being something that maybe is going to get the attention of our state and federal governments, but also at that international level, with UNFCCC level. So it's really exciting to see that there's something there which enables us to have a framework that the kinds of things that we're wanting to do in our institutions can fit into and can be compared to what's happening in other countries. You can see how important it is to be putting effort into all sorts of climate education initiatives, whether it's at a museum or a gallery or an archive or library. There's so many different ways that we can be reaching out to our communities and really encouraging that kind of participation. So we've been doing that at the Australian Museum through our Climate Solutions Centre, and I've been employed to work on that full time as has Maddie just over there, and we are both of us. So it's two full-time positions at the Australian Museum to basically advance ACE. I mean, it's not talked about that necessarily in those terms at the museum, but we are working on climate engagement, and we are using touring exhibitions that go out to the regions that are all based on social research that we do to make sure we're actually connecting to the values and the concerns of the people out there in those communities, not just what we think in cities is something that they should hear. And we're talking about the ways you can save money and the ways you can have beautiful places to live and have strong communities if you're advancing living sustainably and regenerating nature and regenerating communities. And we're using dioramas. You've seen some of them probably over in the gallery there. We've got bigger dioramas that tour. And these are things which are helping to advance conversations in those communities. And so it's not just us coming in a sort of didactic way, it's us coming in a way that's supporting proper participation, sharing of information between people in a community. And we're just making sure that what we're doing is being recognised as an important part of the role of any cultural institution. We're trusted sources of information, and that's a huge thing in today's society, isn't it? I mean, we've all got to find those ways of just picking up information that we actually can trust. And most people we know from surveys do trust museums and other cultural institutions. And so we've got a real responsibility. It's a huge responsibility to make sure that we're putting effort in, we're putting in the hard yards to do the research, the audience research, the social research, the research on the solutions that are out there that we need our communities to step up to, and that we're putting in the money to employ people to work on this and not just sort of leaving it for years and years and years. I don't know what's happening in our cultural sector that people aren't yet recognising the important responsibility we have. But I'm hoping that by using the ACE framework and by having conversations that we convene around ACE in our national conferences and so on in the cultural sector, that we can get more institutions to see that actually, yes, action for climate empowerment is something that we really do need to step up to. And if we step up to that, not only are we helping to, connect to our communities on this incredibly, the most important challenges facing us, but we're also maybe going to get some, sort of useful attention from our government, and maybe that'll bring us some more funding. So I'm hoping that, that we might finally start to get to see some real support for action for climate empowerment in our cultural institutions. So wish us luck, and I hope we can get some more, a groundswell of support across all our institutions. And I mean, if you are not already working in a cultural institution, if you are visiting one, maybe ask, why do you not have anything about climate change here on your walls or in your programs? Because unless we get that sort of critique from our public, I just don't know if we're going to get the action at the speed that we need. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Jenny. And that's also a great way of getting to the wider population who, the wider society that may not be linked into climate conversations. They might not come to climate conferences, but, most of us take our kids to museums, and most of us have that. There's a particular reach that you have that is, I think, a really powerful way of cutting through. Amelia, you have done this amazing report on the Child and Youth Statement on Climate Change. Can you tell us a bit about how do we empower youth and children to engage on a domestic and international stage?
Yeah, hi everyone. Can you hear me? Yep. It's really great to be here and honoured to be able to be on this country, and also being able to share the voices of children and young people in such an important forum like this one. So as you were saying before, Denise, we've recently launched the National Child and Youth Statement on Climate Change, which is this document here. And essentially it's covering the main demands from children and young people around Australia to do with climate change and lots of different thematics which kind of are encompassed in the UNFCCC space. And it's coming together through all sorts of different ways, mainly through different consultations which we've been running around the country. But as you were saying before, there are so many different ways in which you can engage with young people, and this is just an opportunity for people to meet together, to network, to get to meet people maybe outside of their own school communities which are passionate about the same things as them, and to come up with some really specific demands which we can present to different decision makers around the world and also within Australia. And so the Child and Youth Statement is created through a process called the Local Conference of Youth, which is runs all around the world. It's organised by the Children and Youth Constituency, which is like the main UN body for children and youth in the climate space. And through that, within Australia, there are lots of organisations who have banded together this year to organise the Local Conference of Youth. And because we're such a big country, it's often quite hard. It's very hard to kind of get together and find one space and one time where we can all have these discussions like this conference here. To fund young people to come here is quite expensive, especially if you're wanting to try and get regional representation. And so what we've done with the LCOY process, or the Local Conference of Youth process, is we've tried to reach the communities themselves. So instead of us saying, hey, come here after school, come here to Canberra, for example, with your own money and your own finances, but instead we're saying we can come to you and we can provide you a forum and a space in which you can tell us what you really care about, and we can bring that forward to the domestic space, but also to the international space. And so one of the main pillars and ways in which we're able to kind of include the pillars of ACE is that not only are we allowing them a space to kind of share what they think, but we're also educating them. So as Uncle Ray was saying before, a lot of young people aren't necessarily taught enough in school about climate change, or maybe they've heard the word climate change or they've heard the word UN, but they don't really know how they can actually engage in the process. And they might be like, oh yeah, I would really love to see an end to fossil fuels, but what does that actually mean in the international space, right? There are so many different things which we would have to do to get to a fossil fuel phase out, for example. Or there are so many different ways in which we need to finance our transition away from fossil fuels. And so it's really an important situation in which we can actually allow those children and young people to learn in a space in which they can then actually share their ideas, rather than it just being a classroom where, they're taught. And especially with lots of young children, we're often telling them lots of information, and maybe we're trying to make it really practical steps for them. So it's being outside in nature, and that's such an important part of ACE as well, is bringing them into a space in which they can actually engage at their local level, but then also kind of giving them a more oversight of what is the UNFCCC, and how can we actually engage in them more over larger level. And so that's what this National Youth Statement is trying to bring, is all of the voices from all of the young people, about 190 young people were engaged in this year's LCOI, but you've also got to remember that there are 107 LCOIs happening around the country. So this statement isn't just a statement by itself, it's also a statement which can be combined with all of the other statements for not only young people to use within Australia, but also when we go to the UN Climate Conference, we can say, hey, look, we actually are able to be here, and we're not here in our individual capacities, but we're actually here to share what we've learned through this process. And the LCOIs aren't the only way in which we're doing this, but it's one really important way in which we can actually say and encourage young people to say this is actually an official mechanism in which you can engage in the space, rather than just working at the local level a lot of the time.
Amazing, thank you. The public participation element of ACE, I think this is the element that in which we get to have these kind of perspectives influencing policy at a domestic level, internationally. And I think Jared is going to touch on that in a minute. It'd be great to get your perspective on that, because I know that you've been doing work on youth within your remit as well. But before we go to you, Jared, Krista, WWF, can you tell us a bit about the role of civil society organisations, particularly NGOs, in building this local to global connection? And, you know, particularly what's the role there in making the connections and elevating the voices of civil society and the kinds of initiatives that we've been hearing a bit about today?
Thank you. Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks, Denise. I also want to acknowledge the Newell and Ngambri people and pay my respects to their elders past and present and emerging, and thank them for allowing us to have this really interesting and important discussion on their country today. I think the ACE framework, as we've been talking about, provides a really unique way within the international system to make what is sometimes a nebulous and vague sort of broad process really grounded in what is meaningful to people and what makes change. So how do we, I think, take the international legal framework of climate change and ground that in people and purpose? And I think that the ACE framework and having that embedded in the UNFCCC and in the Paris Agreement is a really unique mechanism, actually, in international law to enable that connection. I think ACE allows us overall to learn and share more about the impacts and the solutions in relation to mitigation, adaptation, and resilience to climate change, and what the climate crisis means, what we're all facing, and lessons of what is being done about that from all aspects around the world. I think, however, there is a challenge to us in civil society overall. I think that framework in international law largely still is relatively unknown, and it's a mechanism that I think has such potential to be tapped to an even greater extent. I think there are public sector entities around the world and here in Australia who are very engaged in the framework. I think there are many educational institutions, particularly higher and tertiary education institutions, who are very engaged in different aspects of ACE. But I think that connection is something that we in civil society need to take on in an even more impactful way. And the reason I think that we in civil society have more of a key role to play is that we often sit at the connection of sometimes working and engaging at an more of a project level local impacts lens in relation to climate change. At the same time, sometimes that the very same organization works at a high advocacy level in terms of frameworks. So I think our challenge and our opportunity is, how do we make sure that the semicolons and the square brackets being negotiated in international frameworks are driven by local experiences, and how is that decision making an ambition loop, if you like, from the global to the local, making sure that at the global level, the frameworks being set in place drive investments, drive policy decisions, that are impactful at the local level, and that in turn, what is happening and the crisis being felt at the local level is indeed driving decision-making frameworks at the global level. And I think civil society often sits in that nexus and in that loop, and I think we have a greater opportunity here to take that on and make the whole ACE framework meaningful, I think, in different ways. I think sometimes we are in a very privileged position to be able to look very broadly and to shine a spotlight on what's working in different places around the world and what's not. And I think the ACE framework, again, provides a lens and a voice through which we can help to identify opportunities to support others to step up and really tell their stories. I think similar in some ways to cultural institutions, sometimes large NGOs working in this space can be a trusted voice in relation to science-based information dissemination. We often have large supporter bases who look to organizations in civil society as neutral conveners and neutral arbiters of information. And I think that gives us an even greater responsibility to make sure that we're using this framework effectively. I think, however, we're most effective and most focused when we do that across sectors. We have an important role as a bridge, I think, between working in the climate and environment sector, working in the human and social development sector, working across finance sectors, philanthropy. There's many different types of organizations in civil society, and I think we're most effective when we're bridging across those sectors. And I think the next couple of years, as we look to the bid that Australia has put in to host COP31 in a couple of years in partnership with the Pacific, and the bridge that allows us in terms of the COP this year in Azerbaijan, the COP next year in Brazil, the one the following year back in Africa, COP32. I think the next few years offers a really unique opportunity for us here to be more inclusive about shining a spotlight on local stewardship and making sure that at the international level, those frameworks are indeed driven by a more inclusive frame and centering those voices and those experiences through the ACE framework. And I think just finally, really, ACE offers us an opportunity to step back, I think, and focus on the how and the who of climate action. I think there is a lot of discussion often on the what, the substance of it. And I think through the different components of the ACE framework, we have a real opportunity to focus on how those discussions roll out, who's involved in those discussions, and therefore I think we can be indeed more collaborative and more inclusive going forward on climate action overall.
Thanks, Krista. The Glasgow Work Programme makes recommendations and encourages civil society to implement ACE, but of course it also encourages parties to the agreement. Jared, you're our National ACE focal point. Can you tell us a bit about your job and what are the priorities for Australia in terms of ACE at the moment?
Thanks, Denise. And just acknowledging, I stand with giants. There are people already implementing ACE, across civil society, in First Nations communities, in our cultural sector. There are people like Amelia who are really spearheading youth engagement and youth participation in the process and have been for many years. So yes, we heard a great presentation from Noora about the Glasgow Work Programme. That was quickly followed in Sharm el-Sheikh by the Sharm el-Sheikh Action Plan for ACE at COP27. The challenge, as with other cross-cutting issues, and I also negotiate on gender equality, which is another cross-cutting issue across all climate action under the Paris Agreement. How do you translate these global commitments to the national level, and how do you kind of drive action at all levels? Yes, there's a role for parties to play. There's a role for all of us to play. ACE is predicated on empowering all levels of society. Well, first you have to draw attention to it, and we've heard that I think there's a bit of a information drought when it comes to ACE. We have ACE focal points. I'm Australia's ACE focal point. I don't think anyone actually knows that. But we have 140 parties to the Paris Agreement that have ACE focal points now. Some countries have them in their government, some have them in their education department, some have them as members of civil society. There's no rule. That's the kind of the joy of ACE, that it's flexible and context specific. that's the role, to kind of draw attention to it. So being here on this panel is a fantastic opportunity for government to engage with civil society, to engage with First Nations communities, to engage with the cultural sector. And that's not to mention, we've heard some fantastic presentations from Footy for Climate, which is, another sector that is engaging in climate change. ACE is everywhere. In terms of what the Australian government is doing, we recently made a submission on some of the ACE work that we're doing. And I should also mention that's not exhaustive. We as the Australian government, it's really difficult to understand what's happening at all levels in Australia. So it doesn't capture everything that Australia is doing. And I think that's a bit of a gap. But some of the things we are doing, we're establishing a new youth advisory council on international climate, which is, a bit of a continuation of some of the work we did under the National Youth Engagement Strategy, Engage, which was launched earlier this year. We've continued to promote First Nations and youth participation and engagement at the annual COP climate conferences, really to make sure that we are bringing that diversity of experience and voice to the annual COP as well. These are not exhaustive things, and I think there's a few different reporting mechanisms under the UNFCCC. So while we do report on some of our ACE implementation under the Glasgow Work Programme, we also report under our national communications and under the various transparency frameworks that exist. So we do report on education and public awareness and training more broadly. And Australia last submitted a national communication in 2022, which outlines some of these activities. But a few points I wanted to bring to the discussion. It's been a fantastic kind of 2 days of hearing a lot of different examples of ACE. I think, Denise is right, others are right. We're doing this, we just don't know that we're doing it. So first on public awareness and participation, we've heard a lot about outrage and optimism over the last couple of days, and I'm a big proponent of hope. I feel like ACE is the way to unlock hope for the future, and I think there's a bit of a deficit for that, and maybe that kind of explains some of the pushback, is that we can't imagine the future. I've become fascinated with the concept of solar punk, which is this futuristic art style that's, speculative fiction about what the future might look like. It's now kind of being picked up by architectural and urban designers who are actually trying to reimagine the environment when we do transition to net zero and to nature positive, and what that might look like. That's a really important part to drive public awareness and participation. There's a great quote from AOC, who I'm sure lots of people in this room are big fans. We can be whatever we have the courage to see, and ACE gives us the tools to actually imagine those futures and see those futures. So courage and hope, these are critical to driving climate action, and I think particularly for unlocking that ambitious action that we need to really unlock, to get the speed that we need to keep 1.5 alive, and to engage, particularly as a future potential COP host as well. Also, just wanted to mention too, I think ACE is also a great antidote for climate anxiety, that if you understand the problem, you're more likely to be able to move forward in understanding and grappling with it. And we heard a few presentations about hitting that wall where it's so overwhelming. What do you do? Pick up a book, read something, read a different perspective. Education is one of those keys. And speaking of education, access to information, we've heard a bit about the democratization of energy in some of the sessions. I want to speak a bit about the democratization of knowledge and information, which is also kind of what ACE is all about. That this is not the UNFCCC and the kind of international climate process is meant to be transparent. It's meant to be open for everyone to participate and engage and observe and understand. And knowledge and information is all around us. I think in 2024, we're overwhelmed by information. Google it, everyone says that, but you can literally Google everything. I think there is a bit of a lack of accessibility of information, though, to groups that need it, and that goes to youth and children. I think there's a big gap with how we communicate some of these concepts, even the way we talk. UNFCCC, just call it the UN Climate Change Conference. That's what it is. We don't need to talk about these acronyms. Even ACE, I think one thing I'll talk about just on the implementation side is ACE action. These things aren't about having conversations. We saw that montage yesterday. We've had conversations for a long time. We're now talking about how do we drive action. And I think just keeping the kind of A and ACE in mind is important. A few kind of things that I like to, in my darkest moments, go back to. Think global, but act local, and bloom where you're planted. No matter what you're doing in any sector of society, you can shift it to do something in the climate space. ACE gives you those tools, and we've heard a lot about the ACE toolbox, public awareness information, public participation and training and international cooperation. You can do that, and we've seen some great examples, throughout the last couple of days. In terms of kind of the points that Uncle Ray made about sort of rights-based approaches and human rights and land rights, I think that's really important. ACE requires a rights-based, human-centric approach. We're talking about sort of humans, we're talking about people. So I think poor implementation of ACE that doesn't take context into account can be really harmful. If what say public participation or public engagement or public awareness looks like in one community is going to look very different in another community. And I think there's an important part about the context-specific nature of ACE, acknowledging the social realities and lived experiences of different people. And just to kind of sum up, I mean, ACE has a simple mission to empower all members of society. And I think you really need to focus on the sort of empowerment of everyone, that collaboration and coherence. And we saw Noora talk about the priority areas, but that coordination piece is I think really essential. Like, how do you make sure that we're all moving in the same direction in the ACE space? But thank you.
Thanks, Jared. And I think now everyone does know who the Australia National Focal Point is. We're coming close to time, so I just wanted to pick up on a couple of the points made here today. And one is that it is about action and it's about empowerment. And empowerment means all of us being able to use all the different elements of ACE that we are often using in our daily lives, but use it deliberately. And there is a framework that Australia has agreed to that provides an in for us to speak to government, but also to act and use what is available to us. And I had a conversation a couple of days ago with a partner organisation in Egypt who uses the ACE framework very deliberately. And I said to him, well, what is it about this that you find particularly useful? And he said that ACE is a really balanced framework, that if you apply it to a community that you're part of or that you're working with, and you look at the different parts of it, if you are educated, if you are able to educated about climate change, if you have training in the areas that you are working in for the solutions, if you are able to access information, if you're able to participate in decision making at a national level, at an international level, and if you're able to link in with other groups and organisations and frameworks internationally, then that's actually pretty close to the definition of empowerment. So I think it's that all of the elements together. And for him, it was, if you have one or two, you're not going to get far enough. So I'd invite you all to think about this in terms of the work that you're doing, and as my colleague said, use it as a metric. Are we covering all of those 6 elements? And if we're not, there might be an advantage to looking at what's missing. The other thing that I think we've heard today about ACE is that it is a really powerful tool and mechanism for the voices of the people most impacted by climate change. And so the voices, of First Nations peoples, of young people, of people who are in energy transition jobs, culturally and linguistically diverse people who are most impacted by climate. These are the voices that we need to have influencing policy at a national and international level. These perspectives, however, also need to be in the formal and informal education and awareness raising that we're doing in our daily lives. So it works up the line and it works down the line. And I think that that one of the most powerful things that ACE can offer us is these perspectives, these really valuable perspectives that we've heard of today. Land rights and human rights, for example. So we have COP29 in 60 days, I believe. And so I'd just like to do a quick fire question to everyone in the panel. What would you like to see in terms of ACE in COP29, starting in reverse order?
Thank you for that reminder that COP is in 60 days, which is terrifying. They come around very quickly. I think ACE, what I'd like to see at COP29, I think probably it's very deep in the weeds, but the ACE item has been Rule 16 and we haven't been able to find a way forward in the negotiations. I think there's a bit of a blockage in the kind of how we're implementing ACE and questions about how you resource it, how do you move forward with it. So I'm hoping for a resolution on the negotiation item would be good, because I think otherwise it does mean that, you know, we tend to spend a bit more time talking about more contentious issues in the broader kind of UN climate space than actually sharing best practice in how you implement ACE. Yeah.
I think probably my wish in this regard for COP29 would be picking up on some of what has been said here this afternoon, that there are new and different voices from the local level in different contexts coming to the global conversation. And I think that the international climate change mechanism needs to consider different innovative ways how to do that. So what you were describing, Amelia, in terms of how you actually get voices of youth, not everybody's going to fly over to Azerbaijan. So how do we, at the international level, look at innovative ways to be more inclusive, to get voices who aren't represented there and making sure they're represented there? I'd love COP29 to consider that.
I think for me, one of the most important aspects is ACE is a mainstream topic. So it's not siloing children youth voices as children youth voices. It's not siloing Indigenous voices as Indigenous voices, but rather how can we make sure that all of these marginalised voices are actually being mainstreamed across all of the agenda items which are discussed at the UN Climate Change Conference, and also making sure that we're actually including the voices of young people and more generally civil society who can't be there on the ground in all of the agenda items, rather than just saying, okay, we're going to discuss ACE, and so we need to make sure they're included in ACE.
Right. I want to see some really strong and creative artworks and exhibitions, and they're going to be super creative, and it's going to be things that provide like architecture for imagination to help people to see better futures. And for instance, our Future Now exhibition, I think that should be there, and that would be that's ideal. Thanks.
I'd like to see it, what's that place called, Baku? COP29, isn't it? Okay. I've been to some of the other ones there, but I'd like to see some attitudinal and behavioural change. That would be, for me, something that would be pleasing. I don't like going to them because I see too much hypocrisy. I see too much arrogance. I see too much apathy and ignorance. And if those four attitudes could be attacked and changed, not just at the COPs, but also in our countries, towards this climate change issue, then we might be able to get somewhere. I do have my doubts, but I would like to see those behavioural change and attitudinal changes take place quickly, because I think we're almost at the crossroads, or we might have crossed over the line.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Please join me in thanking our panel today.
Hi, everyone. There's going to be another session in here in about 5 minutes. I know it's 4:30 now, so the session won't start immediately. There'll be about a 5-minute break, and then we'll kick off with one of the big final sessions of the forum.